Can you hear me now?
Now I can.
And can you
Success.
see me now? I'm
Both. You are
sorry.
audible and visible.
Thank
Congratulations.
goodness. I'm
Uh,
alive.
Hello. I am AJ Finn. I am the author of The Woman in the Window and End of Story. And that is my bio. That is 2 books. So here's a proper bio for you. Anthony Horowitz is one of the UK's most prolific and successful writers, unique in being active in both adult and YA fiction, TV, theater, and journalism. His best-selling Alex Rider series for young adults has sold more than 19 million copies worldwide and has become a hugely successful show on Amazon Prime TV. But wait, there's more. He was specially commissioned to write new novels starring the world's most popular detective Sherlock Holmes and specially commissioned to write new novels starring the world's most popular spy, James Bond. His breakthrough murder mysteries, Magpie Murders and Moonflower Murders, had been adapted into a very popular miniseries for PBS. He lives in London and was recently awarded the CBE for services to literature. It has been my privilege over the years to chat with all manner of terrific authors, from Louise Penny to Kate Atkinson to Tess Gerritsen, but I don't know that I've ever been more excited to speak with an author than I am today. I would like to add that Anthony has been important to me both personally and professionally for a number of years now, and it's an absolute privilege to talk to him about anything, including his new book, Marble Hall Murders. So, Anthony, I'm not going to let you get a word in edgewise just yet. I am going to describe this new book, and then we can tuck in.
Great.
In Marble Hall Murders, London-based book editor Susan Ryland finds herself tasked with continuing a new novel in the series featuring beloved detective Atticus Pund, whose creator died and whose murder Susan solved in Magpie Murders. The twist: the writer of Pund's last case is Elliot Crace, the troubled scion of a family once headed by his grandmother, a national treasure whose whimsical novels for children are read the world over. As fact and fiction begin to blur, Susan finds herself mining Elliot's novel for clues about his grandmother's life and trying to solve unexpected deaths both on and off the page. So we've got 2 books in one, 2 worlds to explore. It's an extraordinarily rich and generous reading experience. Anthony and I are going to chat, and towards the end of our spiel, I will be selecting a few questions, a few amongst dozens and dozens submitted by you, our Barnes & Noble readers. But first of all, Anthony, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's lovely to be talking to you.
It's lovely to be
And what a
talking
lovely
to you.
introduction. Honestly, that was one of the. It's great when you're being interviewed by a writer, because only you could have just summed up the book so succinctly and made it sound so great and exciting. It was fabulous.
I would add for our viewers that we are actually not far away from each other right now. We're both in London, but I'm in a hotel, and Anthony pointed out that this woman behind me is quietly
She is
terrifying.
she is sort of the woman in the window, but she is
She is sort of. She's right around the corner from the window. So, first of all, I'd like to talk about continuation. I want to begin at or near the very beginning. The title of the second chapter in Marble Hall Murders is To Be Continued. Marble Hall Murders is, of course, a continuation of what's now a trilogy, beginning with Magpie Murders and Moonflower Murders. But the word continuation has another significance within this book, in which a volatile young writer attempts to pen a new installment of a dead author's best-selling series, as you yourself have very successfully done multiple times. So Susan Ryland, his somewhat reluctant editor and our hero, weighs in. She says, "To begin with, I had no love of continuation novels. Even the name put me off. Who wants just to continue? What exactly is the point? Take the originality out of fiction, and what's left?" How much of this is Susan Ryland and how much of it is Anthony Horowitz?
Well, that's clearly entirely Susan, because as you said, I've written 3 James Bond novels and 2 Sherlock Holmeses, but there is a bit of me in there. I don't like the phrase continuation novel, because I think that a continuation novel, if it does just continue, if it doesn't do something more, if it doesn't add something to the legacy, to the heritage of the writer whose work you are continuing, then I think you have failed. So I don't like the description of it any more, instead. Even I like the words children's literature, because I find that too over-encompassing, and I don't like cozy crime is another thing I always get quite het up about, because how can a crime be cozy? How can a murder ever be cozy? So these are simply words that I don't like. Continuation of it is not 2 words that I use. But Susan's reluctance to get herself involved in a continuation novel doesn't mirror mine. When I was asked to do Sherlock Holmes, my first one, I had to think about it for probably 3 seconds before I said yes.
All of three
Yeah.
whole seconds. It occurred to me as I was trying to shape this question that there is a semantic distinction between continuation, which simply refers to the ongoing of something in some form, and continuity, which implies that whatever is ongoing remains the same. And it seems to me that a lot of the books we have described as continuation novels are really continuity novels. What those publishers want is the exact same thing. And what you have found ways to do is to variegate that.
Yeah, well, of course, that's the point. You don't want to just do, if you're going to do James Bond, you don't want to do it just as sort of, the same again. You've got to acknowledge the fact that quite a lot of years have passed since those great novels came out and the attitudes have changed, that we see things a different way. You have to
Mhm.
somehow grasp the nettle. You have to take what that author has done in its entirety. You have to be faithful and true to that author, but then you have to find a way, if you like, of adding your own little voice somewhere in there. There's no point in just mimicking and parroting. You've got to take it another step forward. The rule to me was always this: if Doyle or Fleming could read what I'm writing, would they be pleased or would they be angry? And I wanted to make sure
Mm.
they were pleased. I wanted them to smile and say, you know what, if we were still writing in the sort of 21st century, this is what we might do.
Speaking of variety, many or even most fiction writers stay strictly in their lane. You have moved very smoothly and very successfully between literature for younger readers, between the world's most famous detective, between the world's most famous spy, and your own original adult mystery novels. Is there a genre that does not interest you?
Romance. I'm not very
Right?
good, wouldn't be good at it. I wouldn't be able to write it. I'm always interested in finding new things to write. I'm writing poetry now. I would never thought that I would ever pen a poem, but I've suddenly found that there's a great amount of solace and a great amount of understanding, well, my understanding of myself and my life can be better phrased in poems than it can in short stories, novels, or whatever. So that's a whole new genre that I'm exploring. Don't worry, I'm not going to recite any poems now, and I'm not intending to publish any either. But it's still interesting to read the great poets like Philip Larkin, who I adore, Seamus Heaney, and older poets. Stevie Smith, you probably won't know who she is, but she was the poet I read when I was growing up, going all the way back to Keats and to Wordsworth, and looking at the great romantic poets and trying to work out how these poems were written and what makes them great, and then trying to emulate them with my own work. I think that writing is, by its very nature, an adventure. You cannot sit there writing the same novel over and over. I mean, you've done the same thing with your two novels, only two so far, as you said, but they couldn't be more different. And I think that's
Yes.
the part of it, is the fun, is challenging yourself and saying, for me, I could be writing now my 47th Alex Rider novel. I could just be writing them for the rest of my life. But that's
Yes.
not the point of being a writer. It is to explore, to experiment, to put yourself in danger, to take yourself outside the envelope and to see what happens.
A quick question about poetry. Do you find in reading anyone from Heaney to Keats, do you find yourself, will this manifest itself in your work, do you think? Does this inspire you on a prose level, or do the emotions find their way into your own writing?
No, I think that's the whole joy of it. I'm writing murder mysteries, I'm writing adventure stories, I'm writing very fast-paced thrillers of one sort or another, and there isn't a lot of room to sit there and start pondering the nature of the universe or what it's like to be getting older or to start thinking about my own mortality and all these things. Anyway, my readers don't want any of the above. I mean, they'd be horrified if that was, there was a chapter in Marble Hall Murders where I suddenly started, becoming introspective and sort of, what is life, what is the meaning of life? I think people would be turning off pretty fast. So no, no, no. This is the whole point of writing poetry now, is to explore. I turned 70 just a couple of months ago, which is a big number when you
Yes.
think about it. And I suddenly started to think about my sort of, all sorts of things I hadn't been thinking about before. And because I'm a writer, I needed to put this. I needed a box to put all this in. And it wasn't
Mhm.
going to be my books. I wasn't going to sit down and write a, James Joyce. I was going to write a sort of, Ulysses. I was going to write, I'm still going to write Atticus Punch. I'm still going to write Daniel Hawthorne. So this had to go somewhere, and poetry seemed to be the answer.
Well, speaking of words, one of the many aspects of your work across your canon that I love is your own love of wordplay. And I don't think I'm spoiling anything when I note that in Marble Hall Murders, and not for the first time, you've dropped clues in the form of anagrams. Where does this come from? Were you a crossword or jigsaw enthusiast as a kid?
The only thing I ever got from my father, who was not a great father and not very a kind man, was but he did do the crossword with me for every day for about 2 years. When I got my first job, we'd travel into London together on the subway system here, and I would sit next to him. He'd get out the Times crossword, which is one of the most difficult crosswords you can get. Not the most, but it's quite high, sort of high level. And he would show me how the clues were solved and what and how you did them. And so when I do it, it sort of reminds me of the better side of him. He's been dead a very long time now. But I've always had a fascination with anagrams. If I get bored in a meeting and such, I'll start just to anagrammatize, if that is a correct word. I'll just look at a picture, like the picture behind you, and immediately I'm sort of going cup wrecked. No, that's not a word. Is there anything that you can make with picture? And it's not cup wrecked, it's kip rucked or something. I don't know.
It's
There
cure,
isn't an
right?
anagram there, but that's. And anyway, I'm not bored, so I'm talking to you. But if
Uh,
I am bored, I will just play games in my head. If I'm driving, number plates of registration plates of cars, I play endlessly with the letters I see there and see how many words I can make out of them.
so I should tell you that I have spent about 45 minutes trying to come up with an anagram for Anthony Horowitz, and there
Well,
aren't very
I'll
good
give you a
ones.
funny thing that when I was like sort of, 9 years old, I worked out that Anthony Horowitz is the Warrenotna backwards. But only a kid with a sort of a fascination with letters and words would do that. But you see, what I'm doing here is that especially in the book Marble Hall Murders, I'm drawing attention to the fact that words are the building blocks of what you and I both do, are
Yes.
malleable, but they have lots and lots of different meanings. You can hide things within them that words can describe, but they can also reveal. And that's one of the great joys. A perfect crossword clue is a sentence that seems to make sense. It isn't complete gobbledygook. It actually has some kind of meaning. But if you look at it in a certain way, it leads to a result. I mean, that's what I've been doing in my books for a very, very long time. My book Moriarty has
Mhm.
at the beginning of it 12, 13, 14 Ash. And nobody,
I
I
remember
mean, that
this.
book has sold a lot of copies, but nobody has ever stopped to think what that might mean. And it is a cryptogram, it's an anagram, it's a trick. And it makes me smile that it's there. Even I know, damn it, after this interview, you will go open the book and you will solve it instantly. But
No, no, I didn't
I
solve
like the
it.
fact. I have liked the fact that it is just there, a puzzle. Life is too, our lives are now often very prescribed. They're very straightforward. Our daily life. If you have a 9 to 5 job and you have a family and you have a mortgage and you're living in the difficult world that we have now inherited, your life is to a certain extent constrained. But I'm always thinking to myself, but there are games you can play, there are escapes, there are ways you can entertain yourself, and
Mhm.
you can have. I'm surrounded by toys here, sort of strange little toys that do nothing. There's a secret passage in this room that leads me nowhere, in fact. But all this stuff, all this sort of nonsense, is what adds to sort of the. It gives me the sort of the smile in my life.
One of my favorite words in the English language, I treat it as one word, some would split it into two, is a word that I think of often when I'm reading your books, and this most recent book is no exception. It's trapdoor. I like that book because of that word because of what it evokes, what it promises, some sort of sudden motion, and some sort of potential captivity or a trick. Your books are absolutely filled. The groundwork is laid with trapdoors, narrative trapdoors, but also etymological trapdoors. Words do not mean what we think they are going to mean. And this brings us to the subject of nomenclature, because character names in your books are important, but also notable are pet names, place names, the title of books within your books, the names of two goldfish and a very sympathetic cat. Some of those names are more important than others. How do you go about naming a character or a setting or a book? And what do you take into consideration?
Well, it's a very good question. I'm glad you raised it because to me, names are terribly, terribly important. When I'm creating a character, I think first of all about their role in the book. So, Susan Ryland might need to have a publisher, someone who's going to employ her and give her a job. And I want to create that character. I know already something about him. He is a publisher. He lives
Mhm,
and works in London, and he will
mhm.
be of a certain age. He's obviously not going to be a teenager. He's going to be somebody mature. But then I start to think about, how do I get to know this character? And the first thing I give him, or her, if it's a her, is a name. Because it's
Mhm.
an interesting fact that when we meet people, the first thing we know about them is often their name. How do you do? I'm Anthony Horowitz. And you
Yes.
immediately start making assumptions based on that name. Not maybe necessarily very big ones, but you still, that is your first knowing of them. And Charles Dickens took this to extremes, of course, because his characters have names that tell you instantly that, for example, if you have a teacher whose name is Wackford
Wackford
Squeers, I
Squeers.
don't want to be
Yes.
taught by him. Thank you very
No,
much.
you don't
If your
want Wackford.
accountant, your business partner is called Uriah Heep, I don't
Yep.
think so, somehow. So the names tell you, now, obviously, that's an extreme case, and I wouldn't do that in my books. But nonetheless, once I've got a name for the character, I can then start interviewing,
Mhm.
interrogating that character about themselves. They've got a name, they've got a role. I can start giving them a face. I can give them a background. I can give them everything that they might bring with them, much of which may be irrelevant to the book. But of course, you can't write a character unless you know who they are.
Something you did in Marble Hall Murders, which I don't think have done to the same extent in earlier books, and this might be a phantom trail here. I wondered if you did it deliberately. Several of the characters have first names beginning with the same letters, and I found this very effective because the book does concern to a certain extent the blurring between two different worlds. We've got characters whose names begin with J, several of them, characters whose names begin with E, several of them. Was this by design, or am I
No,
being a
it wasn't
grad
my
student?
design, actually. I mean, I have, first of all, I've got completely stuck on the letter M. I don't quite know why Marble Hall Murders, Magpie, Moonflower, even, everything. I've got a TV series that's on at the moment in America on MGM, another M, incidentally, and it's called Nobody's in a Mexican Morgue, two more M's. So I don't know why I've got this fixation with the letter M. And one of the funny things about writing Marble Hall Murders, which I had to write very quickly, was I couldn't, for some reason, stop myself having characters with the same first letter in their names. And when I looked down at the cast list, I realized that I thought the alphabet only had 7 letters in it. No, Anthony, it's got 26. Use other names. And the last draft of the novel was actually spent changing all the names
Changing.
of people I had, having said they needed names that I could live with. I then had to change them all for different ones at the very, very end.
Speaking of names,
The
not
letter
all.
R, it was all Richard, Robert, and R
Well,
kept coming.
we've got two R's, I think, but there was a crop of R's before.
But also you've got to remember that this book has got a lot of characters in it, and my first job is it's got two worlds. It's got the world of fiction, it's got the world of reality. It's got
Yep.
1950s golden age crime and the modern day. It's got England and it's got the south of France. So it's got lots of different worlds. And my first job is to make absolutely sure that the audience, the readers, do not get lost. I don't want we do have a family tree and a list of characters at the beginning of the book, which I always find very useful myself. The older I get, the easier it is just to hit the thumb back. But I don't want readers to have to stop and say, God, who is, this Robert Waysmith? Who is he? What is his
Yeah.
relationship to Elmer Waysmith? And who is this other character that seems to know him? I just don't want that to happen. So with so many characters and such a complex plot and 600 or 550 pages, I've got to make sure that the read is a nice, easy one.
What must make that particularly challenging is it's not as though these two worlds are completely or even remotely discrete. It is, in fact, a hall of mirrors with the worlds reflecting one another. So they are braided to an extent, but still you manage to keep them organized. I was one of our listeners, one of our Barnes and Noble readers, Marie Montalto says, well, she phrases this better than I could. How do you maintain so masterfully the dual plot with Susan R. in contemporary time and then Atticus in past decades?
Well, I mean, these are the questions that are difficult to explain. I mean, essentially, it takes me as long to structure the book as it does to write it. And I
Yeah.
spend a lot of time with a notebook and drawings and diagrams and lists of names and arrows and pointers and illustrations and maps and diagrams, questions to myself. And everything is planned before I start writing. I still have room to surprise myself. I still have sequences that I haven't actually completely thought up, which I only write when I get to them in order to keep myself fresh. If you can't surprise yourself, if you can't make yourself feel excited about what you're writing,
Mhm.
how can your readers feel those emotions? So I do
Sure.
leave room for sort of maneuver, but it is a case of just simply thinking up of in this case, we've got two families. We've got the Crasis state in the modern age. We've got Miriam Crasis, sort of doyen of children's literature, who is everybody, as you said in your introduction, the world loves her, but her grandson Eliot knows that she was a monster and she was murdered, so he hides that in his book. And we've got all the people she is connected with, her sons, their family, and her grandchildren, all the rest of it. But then we've got the world that she had created,
Yep.
and the world of Atticus, and also the world that Eliot is creating. Sorry, not the world that Eliot, which
Yes.
is Atticus Punt's world, and the family there, where Eliot is using his own family as characters. So Eliot, is sort of a bridge between. I'm even as I talk to you, I'm making it sound complicated again. It is the
And
problem with these books.
I do want to stress for the Barnes and Noble readers, the book is complicated. It is also astoundingly easy to follow. I was actually amazed by how not confused I was, given all the material.
Well, Dan, you
It's
know what I always say is that one of my books should work a little bit like a watch. If you open a watch and you look at the mechanism inside it, it is going to be
mm.
cogs and wheels and springs and zinc and whatever quartz and you'll never get it back together again because it's so. But if you glance at a watch, you can tell the time instantly, and that is
I
how my
love that.
book should work.
I absolutely love that. So I'd like to talk to you at this point about perspective. You smoothly rotate this narrative not only through different stories and different time periods and different realities, but also different narrative tenses. Susan's perspective is first person, and the Atticus novel is third person. With a first person narrator, we're arguably privy to more than we are with a third person narrator, or is that true? And either way, is that something you take into consideration when plotting a story and the characters' arcs, whether you approach it from the first to the third person perspective?
Well, it has to be that way because you see, first of all, I can't have a first person with Atticus Punt because he doesn't exist. He's a
Yes.
figment of Susan's imagination to an extent. I mean, it's certainly a figment of Eliot's imagination and of Alan Conway's imagination. He is a fictional character, and of course, in fiction, one can have characters who talk in the I, in the first person. But I don't think you could do it from the perspective of his editor, who knows that there is no I, there is only he, because he is a creation.
Yes.
Susan has to be I because her perspective. She is the detective. She is the one whose insights I need to look at. I want to be inside her head. And the fastest way to be inside her head is to live inside her head and to think of myself as her. So it is I for her and he for him.
I've got well, there are technical questions about your chapter beginnings and endings. So the Atticus chapters are headed by numbers, one, two, so on. But the Susan chapters are headed with words. And some of these introduce a character's name. Some of these set the scene, that of a truly hellish prison, Hellmarsh, or of a Loosh members club, Boons, or of course, Marble Hall. And some of these tease the content of the chapter, new evidence, the first anagram, even killer. I really liked this approach because it helped me distinguish between the two narratives, which are already mutually distinct, but still. What was your thinking behind this?
Well, I love chapter headings. I've always liked
Yeah.
them. And all the Hawthorne novels, instead in my other series, always have chapter headings which describe what you're going to read. And when I was a young reader, and I wasn't a very strong reader, the chapter headings always helped me a little bit. It's like a little sort of, a little, here's what you've got in this chapter, Anthony, you're
Yeah.
going to enjoy because it's called murder or because it's called, the ghost or
Yes.
whatever. It's a little advertisement for what follows. And I just like chapter headings. And I think that, some of my favorite writers have had absolutely wonderful chapter headings and tales of and descriptions of what's coming. The reason I have numbers in the Punt series is actually to make life easier for the reader. That when you get to a Punt chapter in the earlier books and it's just a number, it tells you automatically you're back in 1955.
I
So
see.
therefore, it's a different sort of. It just describes two different worlds. That's all. Uh,
As do, I suppose the margins serve the same function, don't they? The Punt
Absolutely. I mean,
margins are
I've always
different.
been a big fan of sort of the typography of a book. I
Yep.
always say this: that books are not just the receptacles of words; they are themselves objects of art, and they, the cover and the typography and the spacing and the look of the book and these wonderful pictures they put on the inside of the English edition I have here, which is this sequence. There is Susan's car and there's
Oh, I
Marble
love
Hall
it.
behind her, and it's
Trendy.
I think all that is important. I was not a smart kid. I was not a bright kid. I was not an easy reader, a good reader. And things that helped me to read are still with me to this day. And those include illustrations, covers, and chapter headings.
Chapter headings, chapter endings. At one point, Susan reads the final words of one of the Atticus chapters that Eliot has submitted and notes, it's a neat chapter end. And a lot of your chapters in Marble Hall Murders conclude on neat chapter ends. I'm wondering whether you think up these ends or endings and work towards them, or if they suggest themselves as you're writing. A few of my favorites, with a wiggle of my thumb, my fate was sealed. I mean, ooh, I want to know more. Or,
Mm-hmm.
you seem like a good person. Don't let them do the same to you. Ooh. And my personal favorite is an exchange between Susan and Elliot. She says, maybe you should write about your grandmother now that she's dead. He gave me a queer look, half smiling, half warning me. Maybe I already have, he
I
said.
remember
I
writing that.
mean, one more chapter,
Yeah, well,
please.
the wiggle of the thumb, for those who are wondering what that means, is she's actually texting a message. She's accepting a job.
Yes.
And it's just and it's so true, isn't it? But all of us, it's a very human moment these days, with computers and phones, cell phones, that with just one touch of your thumb, you can, if you've sent the message to the wrong person, or if you've accepted something you didn't want to do, you are doomed. And it's just a little thumb. And I love that. But, the truth is that again, it's part of my fact that I'm a TV writer as well, and you don't end an episode or end a scene unless it sort of, persuades the viewer to watch the next one. And I think
Mhm.
the chapter endings should do that, but you've got to sort of, I don't like cliffhangers too much. I'm not going to do Indiana Jones style, sort of, there he is
The
hanging off a cliff,
boulder.
and,
Yes.
and the sharks are jumping at him, and the guys are machine gunning him. What was he going to do next? That's a little bit sort of too over the top. But nonetheless, I think building in a little, and to answer your question, what you put to me, when do I think of it? It's not at the beginning of a chapter. It's actually because when I'm running a chapter, I know all the contents of that chapter except probably the end. And when I get to, I've got a list here of sort of 10 things I've got to put in this chapter, which include clues and bits of action and sort of character insights, etc., etc. And then I realize that all 10 are done, and now I've got to get out. I mean, there's probably half a page left to find an interesting way to do something which is different. And to me, that then it becomes quite a challenge to say, yeah, but nothing too silly, nothing too big. It's just got to be something that makes you say, yeah. And you gave good examples of what I do.
Speaking of challenges, this is a question you've answered before. I've heard you answer it before, but I know that readers find it interesting. When Pun conducts his investigation in 1955, a date that I began to notice appeared recurrently throughout the book, Susan in the present is facing different circumstances, which she neatly summarizes as follows, quote, I took out my phone and tapped 4 words into the search engine. Nothing has done more damage to modern detective fiction than the invention of the internet. We have all the information in the world at our fingertips, and there's no longer any need for deduction. And it strikes me as quintessentially Horowitz of you not to take the easy way out. I think many authors writing such a past-present mystery would park Susan at her desk and leave all the detection to Atticus. But I assume the challenges she describes are challenges that you recognize.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I totally believe that all that stuff, forensics, computers, and anything to do with modern crime solving, for me, for the sorts of books I'm writing, spoil the fun. The
Yeah.
whole joy of my books is that the reader is on exactly the same page as both Susan and Atticus Punt and can solve the crimes, both crimes in the modern world and in the 1950s. Instead, in
Hmm.
1955, coincidentally, the year of my birth. I mentioned turning 70, so that may be why it keeps
Yes.
cropping up in the
Oh.
book. However, that's coincidental. But I don't like technology in books. When I was writing the series Midsummer Murders, yet
Hmm.
more on TV in the UK, I kept saying to producers, I do not want to see anybody walk onto the screen wearing a white coat and gloves. I don't want that panoply because it spoils it. It takes it away from the sort of the intellectual joy of solving a crime from an armchair, as Poirot does in one of his books, Five Little Pigs. Never needs to go to the scene of the crime, just solves it cerebrally. And I love that. Sherlock Holmes does it a couple of times too, where he doesn't
Yes.
leave the room and the crime can be solved. You don't leave the room when you're reading my book, so you should be able to do exactly the same.
There's nothing duller, I would argue, than watching a character on a TV screen staring at a screen. It's just inherently
Well, I mean,
undramatic.
that's a very good point. We are adapting our Marble Hall Murders, and I think computers do make a little turn. But there is, I have watched films where the whole thing relies on somebody managing to, films like The Matrix, even or whatever, where some kind of computer coding, Matrix incidentally, of course, was a triumph, but where computer coding is sort of part of a story, it is fiendishly difficult to point at a camera at somebody sitting at a desk tapping a keyboard and make it exciting because we all do it too often ourselves. And we sort of just and also machinery. It's one of the reasons I use a fountain pen. Here's the one I was writing with just before we started. I love the flow of ink and the scratch of a nib and writing my own words without help from Microsoft and from Bill Gates and from the high-tech world. I love the fact that it is possible to write a whole novel. Of course, I have to put it into the computer to send it to the publisher, but I love the fact that it's me and a piece of paper and nothing else.
Is there a particular kind of paper or stock that you like to write on?
Yeah, I use the same notepads all the time. They're called Europa pads. I don't quite know why I like them so much, but this is one of them, which has got my Greek homework on it. I'm showing you, but um, uh, and I just like the paper stock and the ink doesn't bleed through. I'm
Right.
not one of these writers, incidentally, that has a certain number of hours or a certain pen or a certain, word count per day. I try to avoid anything that smacks either of pretentious sort of, oh, I only use a Faber-Castell
A quill. Yes.
X779B, all that stuff. I have a different pen for every novel. That's probably the only real writing luxury I enjoy. But I just bought a pen this afternoon because I just saw it. It's a $50 pen, but it still it'll write my next novel, and it's exciting for me.
I
And
love
I love
that.
ink. I love ink. I absolutely love all the different colored ink. There's an ink behind me. I'm going to reach for it. Here it is. Here. It's so you won't even believe this exists. But look up the name of that ink. It
Is
is
that writer's
called
blood? Is
it
that
is
what it
called
says?
Writer's Blood. Isn't that fantastic? It is
Is it
phenomenal.
dark red?
I love writing with that one.
Uh, I will. We'll take a bit of a breather because there is something I wanted to say at you
Mhm.
concerning the human touch in this book. We popped the lid on it and looked at the engine thus far. But another Anthony Horowitz hallmark is the human touch. Midway through the book, a body is discovered. I wouldn't dream of saying whose. And the way you stage this is both interesting and affecting. The person who discovers the body is a character we haven't previously met, and indeed we will not see him again. You mentioned his name 3 times, but you do give him a name. And a lot of authors would have simply noted that the body was found, or at most that the person who found the body was, say, a fisherman. But you definitely provide a few more details concerning his background and his activities before finding the body. Why did you do this?
Because it's for the same reasons we were talking about cozy crime earlier. I think that murder is a horrible thing. Murder in real life is awful and dreadful and causes so much harm to whole families, to parents. You lose a child, you lose somebody you love. And I don't think murder should ever be treated just as simply a box tick to get you into the next chapter in the book.
Mhm.
So when there are two things here. Whenever I write a murder, I am thinking of the emotion of that murder. Even the book is heightened and it's sort of, a fun book. I still feel a certain sadness because of somebody dying. But also, when the killer is revealed at the end of the book, I have never yet written a book. I don't think, I'd have to think of all the ones I've done, but nearly always I have a sympathy for the killer as well. Because by and large, I don't think human beings are evil. I don't think we set out to do harm. Yes, there are many human beings on the planet right now who are doing a great deal of harm. But even the worst of them began as children. They didn't necessarily begin as evil monsters. And I always think it's a big, big mistake to write off anybody, a dictator in a foreign country or a major criminal, and say this person is just evil, they are the
Mhm.
devil, they are whatever. If you don't begin to understand them and try and understand the emotions that got them to where they are, then I'm afraid you're doomed to be up against others and to recreate them over and over. You've got to go for sort of the human side of everybody. I think that all the killers in my book. I mean, certainly in the last in Marble Hall Murder, even there's a killer who is revealed as part of the story, and I have a sort
Mhm.
of a half sympathy even for that person.
I did. I did. And in Marble Hall Murders, Susan visits a killer from a previous
That is
installment.
right. That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, yes. Yep. And she notes this passage struck me because there was a throwaway reference to the Silence of the Lambs. She says, "Okay, well, I'm speaking to this person in a prison, same dynamic, man being interviewed by a woman, etc." And what's quite canny about that was that, all right, structurally, yes, it is like that. In no other respect is it like that.
Hannibal Lecter, of course, one of the great, great monsters of fiction. I don't think we have any sympathy for him as much as we
No.
like him. That was, I think, the Thomas Harris's genius was to create somebody who is repulsive and hideous and yet somehow admirable. I mean, it doesn't work. It shouldn't work, but it does, and that's why he sold millions and millions of copies and made some amazing films. And Anthony Hopkins won an Oscar. So
Yeah.
it has that to do that. But in that sequence, Susan references Hannibal Lecter simply because I think it would be impossible to meet a dangerous criminal
Of
inside a
course.
prison and
Who
not
wouldn't
see
think it?
the back of your mind or the front of it, compare yourself with that. But what's interesting about that sequence is, and why I was so glad to write it, and incidentally, I want to tell you, I saw 2 weeks ago the filming of that scene, the actual film, the cut of that scene of Susan and this man in prison. It lasts about 15 minutes. It's round a table, just the two of them talking. It is a masterclass in acting. I mean, Leslie Manville has never been better, and Michael Maloney, the other actor playing the opposite her, is just rises to it. It is thrilling to watch, and it occurred to me when I was writing it that when you write a murder mystery story, you finish nearly 99% of the time. You finish with this is the killer. She is arrested. Off they go to jail. The end.
Yep.
You never then ask, but what happened
What
next?
happened?
What did they repent? Were they sorry for their crimes? How did they feel about being caught? What was the rest of their life? Did they obviously they would have missed their wives, their husbands, their loved ones, their children, whatever. And then you start to ask yourself, what if you or I were to in extremis commit a murder?
Hmm.
It's the right response to lock us away for 20 or 30 years. I mean, if I killed somebody, I had this actually as a title of a book. Killing with Kindness is a book I want to write. Supposing I
Good
would have
title.
killed somebody to help them, supposing it was somebody who was terribly ill, would
Mhm.
sending me to prison be the correct response for that? I'm not answering that question instantly. Many people listening to this will say, well, yes, of course it would be the right. It is illegal to kill. If you kill, you go to jail. But I think to myself, it's not quite as simple as that sometimes. And I question also the validity of jail and prisons. It's something I've been doing. I worked a lot with youths in prison and youths behind bars. And so it's something that I'm sort of, has been very much a part of my life. And I am convinced that, whatever you may think about prisons and capital punishment, all the rest of it, 100 years from now, we'll look back with absolute sort of, bewilderment, but this was considered the right way to do it.
I have literally 14 more questions. I'm only going to ask two because then I am going to give our readers a voice. Police. These novels are very much concerned with detection, amateur, certainly in the form of Susan, but also actual law enforcement. Your two primary police officers in Marble Hall Murders also happen to be my two favorite characters, the irascible, imaginary Frederick Voltaire and the sensitive, real-world Ian Blakeney. And you might say, too, that they're Susan's favorite characters as well. Given how done to death cops are in crime novels and mystery fiction, how do you manage to create police characters as original and unexpected as these two?
Well, let me focus on Ian Blakeney, who is absolutely wonderful, just wonderful in the TV series. I look at him with absolute joy and amazement. How good he is. His first name is Danny, and for my sins, I've forgotten his surname, but still. And he's very unexpected because Susan has only ever been up against Locke and D.S. Locke, who was horrible to her in two books,
Yep.
and the police in most of my books have been quite hard edged. This
Yes, I
guy,
know.
Blakeney, is so humane and so lovable and so different and so good. And I really, really enjoyed writing him. He is such a special character. The character in the south of France, Voltaire, is also, I think, an interesting man. He's hard edged. He's got problems. He's got a disfigurement. He's
Yep.
a war victim and such. But his relationship with Punt is surprisingly, by the
Yes.
end. And what is nice about it is in both cases, the relationship changes. When Blakeney comes to Susan, it's to arrest her, but suddenly they
Mhm.
become that relationship changes, let's say. And in the case of Voltaire, he absolutely does not want Punt anywhere near him. But by the end of that sequence, he's also changed his tune. And I
Yep.
think that one of the great things about writing a character is to remember that they can change. But over
Change.
the course of a book, they are not just simply that, their role is not simply to shout and to stamp their feet, or it might be in chapters 1 to 10, but when you get to chapter 11 or whatever the title of it might be, they can begin to change. And I love that. I loved writing both those characters.
Well, the changing of characters brings me to my final question. It, in fact, concerns the killing off of characters because Atticus Punn's future looked grim after his creator died in Magpie Murders, and now he's dying of a terminal illness in a book called Punn's Last Case, which does not seem to allow for escape. And Elliot, his resurrector, says at one point, Hund was killed off. I never think it's fair when you've been following a character for 8 or 9 books and the author kills him off. It seems unnecessary. Now, there are many antecedents. Arthur Conan Doyle killed off Sherlock Holmes, as you know, in
And brought him
1893.
back.
Yep, brought him back 10 years later due to popular demand. And in a 1930 interview I dug up, he said, to tell the truth, I am rather tired of hearing myself described as the author of Sherlock Holmes. One would think I had written nothing but detective stories. I have done with him. And Agatha Christie, of course, called Hercule Poirot, her signature detective, a detestable, bombastic, egocentric little creep, and eventually he too dies. Are there any particular killings off in fiction that you as a reader found particularly satisfying or disappointing?
Well, I'll tell you the death that I most regret was James Bond in the last film. I think that was an absolutely terrible mistake, and I think that they are still struggling with how to come back from it. I love everything that Barbara Broccoli and Michael Wilson did with the character over all those years, but I thought the death of Bond was terrible, and it has
And
always
why
been
did
my
they do it?
contention. It's always been my contention that actually to kill your main character is a bit of a slap in the face for the readers. People used to say to me, "Will Alex Rider ever die?" And it seems to me the answer was obvious. Of course he won't die. He's 14, 15, 16 years old. He's a kid. I don't kill kids in my books. I think, his life is ahead of him. I might stop writing him. I might die, but he won't. And writing Bond and writing Sherlock Holmes, I was very much aware of how important these icons are in our lives. If you love a character in literature and fiction, I think the first thing you can expect is that they will continue to live, because I don't think writers have many responsibilities, but I do think they have that responsibility to the reader, which is to leave them with hope.
Well said. And speaking of readers, I'm going to select a few questions. I want to recognize the many Barnes Noble readers who submitted these questions. Again, dozens, and they are terrific. They were considered an individual. I'm choosing these almost at random, but I'm grateful for all of them, and I know Anthony will be as well. So this is from Katie Wastland, who says, what did you learn about yourself after writing Marble Hall Murders?
About what did I learn about myself after writing Marble Hall Murders? Gosh, that's a tricky question, Katie, and rather trickier than Dan's. I guess I'll tell you what I really learned was that my writing is getting better. I think that's what my big lesson was. Marble Hall Murders, I wrote under enormous pressure. I had to write it very, very quickly. I was quite worried about finding an idea I would like, but um, but it worked. I think it's the best. Everybody has said it is the best
It
of the
is.
three. I mean, the
Yeah,
reviews have been astounding, and I think that the pressure I put myself under, the difficulties of writing it, which were very serious at one stage, nonetheless produced my best book. So I've just learned that although I have got older, I am actually writing better, and that's a very nice thought. Instead, I noticed that one message flashed up as I was talking about they'd be upset if Hawthorne died, and I would say that I might just. I am thinking that he might be the one character of mine. I'm going to write 12 books about him. I'm not sure he'll survive the 12th. But that's only because there are definitely only going to be 12 books. So I write more on whether he lives or dies, there won't be any more books about him. So I haven't decided yet, but it's a possibility.
although we've been talking a lot about Susan, a lot of these questions do refer to Hawthorne, who is wildly popular. So here's one from Tom Hurls about both. He says, can you speak to the rotating nature of your two ongoing mystery series? Is your writing process very different with Susan compared to Hawthorne?
Well, it's an interesting question. Again, the Susan books are so complicated, but I have to do an awful lot of thinking, and they do take it out of me, especially after having written so many books. The Hawthorne books are shorter; they're only about 90,000 words, as opposed to sort of 160. So they are a little bit more linear and a little bit. But the one I'm writing at the moment is, it's a zany sort of twisty and turny story, and I have to keep sort of struggling to remember where I am with it. Here it is sitting here on the desk with me.
Let's
This is
see.
what I'm spending the whole day doing, and that there it is so far.
Ah,
30,000
there
words.
it is.
Uh, but I forgot what the question is now. No, the difference there isn't a great deal of difference in them. I am trying to make my stories as challenging as possible. I don't want anyone to guess them. I want people to find things that are new in them. And this book starts with the filming, this new one. The sixth Hawthorne starts with the filming of The Word is Murder. The first book is now being filmed, and it's a murder on the set. with Hawthorne and me watching two actors portraying us. So you can see already that it's a sort of a bit of a Mobius strip of a book.
That sounds really fun. Here is a question from Terry McLeod. Which is the favorite character that you have created?
I guess it would be Alex Rider
It
in my
would be, I
kids' books,
suppose.
only because I've written 14 books with him in it, because he changed my life. My career took off after Stormbreaker, published 25 years ago in 2000. And because also I'm very proud of the fact that Alex has contributed to getting so many young people reading. We're living in an age where in the UK, fewer and fewer kids are reading books and enjoying books. And Alex has managed to introduce children to books. And I think, especially for you and me, Dan, if we're going to have a future in this business, we need children to grow up and to continue reading adult books. We've got to catch them when they're young and show them that reading is a wonderful activity and not a chore and not difficult and just brings so much joy. So Alex would be my first choice.
You mentioned the future of our industry, and so I'm going to go for this. If you don't want to deal with it, I will retract it. It's about AI. Now, earlier this year, various outlets reported that Mark Zuckerberg's company, Meta, which was already the subject of a copyright infringement lawsuit brought by multiple authors, had not only been using copyrighted works to train its AI models and programs on Facebook and elsewhere, but had actually been sourcing those training works illegally as pirated torrents from a shadow library that originated in Russia and houses millions of books, all of yours, both of mine. And this shadow library, Library Genesis, has already lost multiple court cases and incurred multiple fines, but it keeps resurrecting itself and proliferating across the internet. And Meta's internal documents, which the company had attempted to redact, also alleged that Zuckerberg approved the use of pirated materials. How do you, does AI frighten you? If so, why? To what extent? That's a tough question, I know.
Okay, it's a big question, and we don't
It
have
is a
two
big
hours
question.
to talk to each other. But I will say this very briefly. As to the sort of the harvesting, what is the word they use for it? It's not harvesting of material.
But it is something like that.
Yes, it's a word similar to it.
Scraping or something.
Yeah, so that's exactly what it is. Scraping, I think it is. Um, of course, it's illegal. Of course, it's wrong. I'm afraid I'm quite fatalistic about it. The
So am
ship
I.
has sailed. The crime has been committed. AI is based on your and my work and other thousands of other writers. And although there are some very brave souls whom I admire very much who are trying to fight back and trying to have court cases, I don't believe anything will ever happen. It is too late. That is the
Mm,
nature of technology. High tech is another. The people who are the powerful half dozen or dozen people who now control all the technology in the world are untouchable. That is the terror of it. That's the fear of it. So in terms of fighting back for the right for my material not to be paid or whatever, it's over. It's not going to happen. Forget it.
yes.
They're too powerful. We're too small. That's fatalistic. I support the fight. I don't think there has much chance of it. But here is the other side of it. What we as writers have to get across is this, that AI, which is meant to stand for artificial intelligence, is no such thing because it is not intelligent. I wrote about this just last week in an English magazine. What it is AI, it is advanced imitation. It can take your work and it can take my work, it can imitate it, but I have yet to read anything that AI has done or see a single picture or photograph created by AI which is nearly as good, anywhere near as good as you and me. And one of the reasons is that AI doesn't know how to be stupid, it doesn't know how to
Mm,
fail, it doesn't know how to make mistakes, it doesn't know how to be self-deprecating, it doesn't know how to be happy or sad. How
yep.
can it therefore write? The danger with AI is that we come to accept it as the new norm, that we can say, I don't need to read a novel by AJ Finn or Anthony Horowitz. I can buy or get for nothing a cheap knockoff imitation of those guys. But they've got to realize when they're reading it, but they're reading something which is second or third or even fifth rate. And most of
Hmm.
it is. I mean, yes, occasionally a cartoon will make you smile. A poem will might make you think for about a quarter of a minute, but actually it's clever. But exactly what somebody Lynette has just said, AI has lowered
It's
the bar.
lowered the bar.
It
Yep.
has lowered the bar. Let us remember there is a higher bar, and that higher bar is human beings, like your readers, like viewers, like everybody on this planet, and not like machines.
I expect people are applauding you, the Barnes and Noble
Well,
readers. To whom I would like to say thank you so much. Can you please, at your desks, give Anthony Horowitz a round of applause? I would also like to remind those who bought a ticket that included Marble Hall Murders with a signed book plate. These books will be delivered to you in 8 to 10 business days. If you do not receive it, or if you would like one, please visit barnesandnoble.com or your local Barnes & Noble store. And Anthony, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for
And
chatting.
thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for saying lovely things at this moment on my screen, which I'm loving seeing. I've so enjoyed this evening. Dan, you are the best. And thank you to Barnes and Noble for hosting this. I've had a lovely time. Thank you.
So, bye. All right. Speak soon. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.